investigation at this hour. Several new documents have just come out. What do they mean? Do they mean anything at all? We will walk you through it throughout the course of this hour. Also tonight, incoming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that the very idea of a border wall is immoral.
Most of us, speaking for myself, consider the wall immoral.
The wall is immoral. What does that say about how Pelosi views this country? And Republicans take the hint, they've got about 3 weeks left in history to fund the border wall they promised. We'll discuss all that in a minute, but first, tonight's breaking news on the Mueller investigation. We go to the person we always go to, and for good reason. Fox Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us.
Well, thanks, Tucker. Let's just kind of break it down together because there's so much here. So all of this came down for folks at home really late in the day. We had 3 filings over a 90-minute period. Let's start in New York with the president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen.
Yes.
Okay, so 2 filings, one from the U.S. attorney in the Southern District, the second from the special counsel. The bottom line on sentencing is that they're recommending significant jail time, about 4 years, and a fine of $500,000. Buried in the special counsel filing is kind of an indicator of what kind of information he's provided on Russia. And I'm just going to go to my glasses and the paper here for a second.
Thank you.
To read the quote. Okay, so it says, Cohen provided the SCO, that's the acronym for Special Counsel Office, with useful information concerning certain discrete Russia-related matters core to its investigation that he obtained by virtue of his regular contact with company executives during the campaign. Cohen provided relevant and useful information concerning his contacts with persons connected to the White House during the 2017 to 2018 period. So what we've got in the filing is kind of a window into this Russian contact, but then we kind of feel a little cheated because we don't know from the filing what happened with those Russian contacts and whether they were appropriate at all or inappropriate.
Okay. That suggests more than it tells.
Exactly. That's my point. It's kind of like a teaser. You see some of this information.
Right.
We already know with Michael Cohen that he pled guilty to lying to Congress about this Moscow real estate deal in 2016. Remember,
it did not take place.
That's right. It was a timing issue. Cohen told Congress that they stopped talking about it in January 2016, but in fact, they continued the conversations until June. So that was at the height of the presidential campaign and past the Iowa caucuses. So that was kind of a timing issue. But based on the filing today, it looks like there may well be other contacts that were important with the Russians. But again, we don't want to speculate because we don't know what the essence of those contacts are and whether they're relevant to this allegation of coordination or collusion or improper contact.
So we had also today heavily redacted documents pertaining to Paul Manafort. What do we know? What do those tell us?
Well, okay, so Paul Manafort's important because he's the former campaign chairman, and the allegation from the special counsel is that he violated his plea agreement. He pled guilty to a number of crimes, but part of the negotiation is that he would cooperate with the special counsel and he'd look at a reduced jail time, and his wife and his daughter would be able to keep their homes. That was sort of the big sort of bone they were holding out to him. But what happened today is that the judge agreed that part of the filing would be under seal, which means for a lay person that it's not public, that you can't see it. Period, you can't see it. And that would go to ongoing investigations. And then there's a part that is public, but as you've known from seeing it, it's really heavily redacted, that section as well. And it alleges that Manafort broke the agreement by continuing contact with the administration, though he had been told to cease all contact.
Now, there's a story tonight, we can't confirm it, that in parts of that filing that are veiled from public view, the investigations ongoing that are referred to in the document pertain to Tony Podesta.
Right. I don't have that independently, but what I could say just as a data point is that it makes a lot of sense to me because what we've been seeing in the background here is that there is an investigation looking at Tony Podesta and his lobbying work, and also the former, I believe he was the White House counsel under the Obama administration, Greg Craig. And one of the questions Republicans have had is whether the special counsel investigation is only going to look at Republican lobbying efforts that were violating this Foreign Agents Registration Act, or whether, the shoe would be on the other foot and they would look at Democrats.
Manafort, of course, was in effect working with Tony Podesta for quite some time in representing these foreign interests. Catherine Herridge,
thanks for breaking it down.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there was a lot. You're welcome.
We'll see you again. Alan Dershowitz is, of course, a retired and eminent law professor at Harvard. He's also the author of the book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thank you very much for coming on. So all of this is kind of coming out as we're reporting it, and it's hard to assess. But I just want to get to the core allegations once again. So you heard Catherine Herridge say repeatedly that the special counsel says that Michael Cohen is in contact with the Russians at various points. How would that be criminal? Under what circumstances would that be criminal, do you think?
Well, it would only be criminal if, for example, this is a hypothetical, the campaign or President Trump or somebody in his behalf offered Putin a penthouse apartment at the top of the tower in exchange for getting a permit to build the tower. That would be arguably criminal under the Federal Corrupt Practices Act.
Right.
Short of that, it's very, very hard to see this. What I think we're seeing is a coming attraction to what the report will be. And I think the report will set out a circumstantial case based on all the lying that's taking place, a circumstantial case for arguably political sins. But I don't see any crimes. Collusion itself is not a crime. Using information given by Russia to WikiLeaks would not be a crime unless the campaign participated with WikiLeaks in the hacking itself. And there's no evidence to support that. So what I'm afraid is going to happen is this special counsel, whose job it is only to find crimes, not sins, only crimes, will blur the line between crimes and sins and write a report designed to put the president in a bad light. But in the end, they won't be able to find any specific violations of federal criminal statutes unless they stretch these vague laws like obstruction of justice beyond any recognition.
So is it a prosecutor's job constitutionally to paint a politician or anyone in a, quote, bad light without charging him with relevant crimes? I mean, that's not in his purview,
no,
is it?
it's worse. It's worse than improper. It's unconstitutional. The grand jury has a specific function. It's supposed to only indict or not indict. Indeed, prosecutors generally don't issue reports for that reason because they only hear one side of the case. They don't hear the other side. There's no cross-examination of witnesses. That's why it's regarded as wrong for prosecutors to issue reports. That's what Comey did wrong. He should never have gone beyond saying we're not indicting Hillary Clinton.
Exactly,
In fact, he shouldn't have said it at all. It should have been a Justice Department official. And now I think it's wrong for there to be a public report laying out a political case. Now, at the very least, what has to happen is the new Attorney General has to, if he receives the report, say, I'm not making it public until the other side has had a chance to rebut it and file its own report. Then you get two political reports, one from each side, and the public can judge. But this sounds like a distortion of what prosecutors ought to do. Prosecutors ought to do up and down, indict, not indict.
Exactly.
If you have the evidence of crime, indict. Otherwise, shut up.
So when the special counsel's office releases documents, as they did today, that make cryptic references to meetings with Russia without explaining why this is relevant to the public interest or illegal, does it raise the suspicion that this is a manipulative public relations move rather than a legal one?
Well, it raises the suspicion that the final report will also include allegations of political sin rather than specific crimes. Yeah. And that's just not the proper role of special counsel or any prosecutor. And I hope it doesn't happen. I hope that Mueller, who has a generally good reputation as a prosecutor, will remember that his job essentially was to uncover crimes that occurred before he was appointed. At the moment, most of the crimes he's uncovered occurred after he was appointed. Lying to Congress, lying to prosecutors, and crimes that are unrelated to his mandate. Manafort, financial crimes, Cohen, taxi cab crimes. Right. The only crimes he seems to have found relating to Russia are by Russians. And that was not part of his mandate, number one. And number two, nobody's going after these Russians. They're not going to be sent to the United States. They're not coming to Disneyland where they can be arrested. So that's pretty moot.
So very quickly, one final more general question. You've watched our legal system and participated in it for many decades now. Is it common for prosecutors, good people, people of integrity, to become caught up in a kind of vortex of zealotry where they kind of lose sight of the law and become really focused on destroying people?
Well, I think that's the problem with special counsel, because you come in and there's somebody out there or people out there with targets on their back. And in this case, he went after so many people who had close connections to the president in an attempt to get him. You don't have to believe me. Listen to Judge Ellis, who presided over the Manafort case. He was very critical of how the special prosecutor is squeezing people, not only in order to make them sing, but in some cases, people are composing because they think the better the story, the better the deal. It also gives a lesson, an object lesson to criminal defense lawyers. Be careful when you make a deal, because when you make a deal with the prosecutors, they can really come back and hurt you.
Exactly.
Look at what happened to Cohen. He made a deal. The special counsel says he's cooperated, but the U.S. attorney in New York says he still ought to get substantial jail time. That's why in 53 years of practicing law, I have very, very rarely made deals or made pleas with prosecutors because I basically don't trust them. I don't trust the system. The system today is so skewed in favor of prosecutors and against defendants.
We may be losing perspective of this. I just want to remind our viewers on our way out that you are not a figure on the right. You are not a Trump voter. You're merely defending what you think is our tradition of law. And I appreciate that.
And I've been saying the same thing for 55 years. I've been saying the same thing for 55 years. I've expressed the same criticism of prosecutors, whether they go after Democrats or Republicans.
Amen. Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as we said at the open, there is breaking news from the Mueller investigation. We're not exactly sure what some of it means, but it is coming at us right now. Former FBI Director Jim Comey testified, by the way, on Capitol Hill today. He dropped his initial plans to mount a legal challenge to the subpoena he received from Republicans on the committee. What did we learn from Comey on the Hill? Tom Fitton was watching carefully. He is president of Judicial Watch, here to tell us about that and to assess the Mueller memos we were just talking about. But first to Comey. Tom, thanks for coming on. What did we learn?
Well, we learned that Comey isn't worried about being prosecuted for any misconduct because he didn't take the fifth. And we also learned the FBI and Justice Department are still hampering the investigation by ordering him not to answer many key questions, according to Republicans who've complained about the way it proceeded.
Can I ask you a question, though? Didn't Comey, am I overstating this, and I want to be fair, but it seemed to me like Comey committed perjury last time he testified because he said that he had never participated in leaking while FBI director, and then Andy McCabe, who would know, later said that he had. Did anyone ask him about that?
Well, I don't know, but I guess it depends on what the meaning of leak is.
I guess it does.
And he took those FBI memos, FBI files of Donald Trump, and leaked them with the specific purpose of getting a special counsel appointed. You know, he ought to be under criminal investigation for taking those records and leaking them. And he's also under investigation about potentially taking classified information. And, you know, if you're under criminal investigation at the federal level and someone asks you questions about it in an official circumstance like this, you often take the fifth.
Are you starting to, I mean, meanwhile,
but he didn't.
George Papadopoulos was in prison until a minute ago. Are you getting the impression that the truly powerful really don't face legal consequences? It's always the little guy. It's always Jerome Corsi, some 72-year-old writer for Newsmax, who gets threatened with prison. But Jim Comey, the FBI director, gets to do whatever he wants. That kind of seems like the lesson.
Well, it's not necessarily powerful, but it's a partisan process. Because President Trump's powerful, but he's being attacked and abused.
Good point.
But if you're connected to the Democratic establishment, if there's a partisan nature here, which is to get Trump, you're protected. And Mr. Comey is Mueller's witness. He appointed Mueller. He's friends with Mueller. He worked with Mueller. He's friends with Mueller. And now we're seeing what happens if you're a friend of Mueller. You get protected by this Justice Department and this FBI. And if you're not a friend of Mueller, you'll be used and abused in the case of Cohen, who was used to go after Trump in dishonest ways, in my view, by this special counsel. And he's being abused and being thrown under the bus. Oh, yeah, we used his testimony. We were able to insert the word Russia 50 million times as a result of these plea deals that really didn't have anything to do with Russia collusion. But we're going to ask the court to allow him to go to jail for at least 3.5 years.
It's making a lot of us very cynical, and I wish it weren't. because I love this country. There was a ruling today pertaining to Judicial Watch and Hillary's emails. What happened?
Well, actually, it was yesterday. It was a big ruling by Judge Royce Lamberth, who opened up discovery into the Clinton email issue. He's angry about what the Justice Department and the FBI did. He fears that he was hoodwinked, or they tried to hoodwink Judicial Watch and the court in keeping these emails away from us. He's concerned that Hillary Clinton created this email system to avoid FOIA. And he really went after this Justice Department for coming into court and engaging in what he called chicanery to try to make excuses for and explain away the misconduct that saw these emails hidden and the email system used to avoid court scrutiny, congressional scrutiny, and questions from the American people. In fact, he asked, was Benghazi one of the reasons they didn't want us to know about these emails? So this discovery is significant.
Amazing.
And, you know, Congress is out to lunch on this, and Justice Department is on the other side, but the court wants more answers.
Whatever happened to the Republican Congress? We got to do a series on that, maybe in January. Tom, great to see you. Thank you. 3 whistleblowers have come forward with allegations of corrupt dealings at the Clinton Foundation. That's according to Republican Congressman Mark Meadows. He says the whistleblowers produced hundreds of pages of documents. They exposed misallocations of funds and the creation of quid pro quo arrangements during Hillary Clinton's time as Secretary of State. That would be influence peddling for those watching at home. The continuing investigation in the Clinton Foundation is the subject of a scheduled congressional hearing next week. Peter Schweitzer is well-traveled in these waters. He's the author of Clinton Cash, and he joins us tonight. Peter, thanks very much for coming on. Who are these whistleblowers? Do we know?
We know that they have done work with the FBI, that they work with a consulting firm. We know that they did research that include apparently an interview or a discussion with the CFO of the Clinton Foundation. I have not seen the material yet, Tucker, but I think it further confirms this long-established pattern of serious questions about what the Clinton Foundation is up to. And, you know, if you think of the scales of justice, Tucker, look at what launched the Trump-Russia collusion investigation, which was the Steele dossier. By the way, I thought it was a good idea to investigate this. That launched the Trump investigation. On the Clinton Foundation side, we know that money was transferred to the Clintons. We know that they had agreed to disclose donors, that they hid those donations. You could find the $20 donation from a Mary Smith in Arkansas, but the $2 million donation from the chairman of a Russian-owned uranium company was not disclosed. We know that they lied to journalists about meetings that the journalists said took place, that the Clintons said never happened, and only when the journalists showed them the photographs did they admit that they happened. And we had an internal review by the Clinton Foundation itself, done by Simpson Thacher, which talked about the fact that there was a pay-to-play expectation by big donors. So this is going to further confirm what we've already known. And for the life of me, how you can launch an investigation based on the Steele dossier, which Comey admitted was salacious and unverified, but you can look at this other body of information and say, well, there's nothing to see here. Proves the point I think that Tom Fitton made earlier, that justice seems to be certainly not balanced and seems to be partisan.
So a pay-for-play offer to foreigners from a foundation run by the Secretary of State, I mean, that's in the criminal category, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, people make this mistake all the time. They say to me, well, it's a charity. It's very, very clear. The bribery charges in the United States, the international bribery standards to which Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State committed the United States to, the international bribery standard says if you donate to a person, if you give money to a political figure, if you give to their family members, or if you give to their charity, that's all criminal if you're trying to engage in pay-to-play. And by the way, American companies who have given to legitimate charities in foreign countries for that purpose have been charged under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So it's a very serious issue.
So the line on the Clinton Foundation was always, as you just said, it's charity, and it continues its important work of fighting childhood obesity around the world, or whatever it was pretending to do. How is it doing now that there's no more influence to sell? Do we know?
Great question, Tucker. We know that donations are way down, off by more than 50%. Now, you would think that Bill and Hillary Clinton, she's not running for president. You'd think they'd have a lot of time on their hands to do a lot of fundraising for the Clinton Foundation, but the money has basically dried up, particularly from foreign entities. So this should be no surprise. And if you chart the rise of the Clinton Foundation, particularly with foreign donations, Tucker, it rises and falls with the political fortunes of the Clintons, which is just further evidence of why they were donating this money. And by the way, to the work of the Clinton Foundation as a charity, this internal review that was done by Simpson Thacher, they interviewed Clinton Foundation employees and asked them to rate the effectiveness of the Clinton Foundation as a charity on a scale from 1 to 10. The average Clinton Foundation employee gave it a 4. So they didn't consider it a very effective charity, even though that's where they worked.
If your employees are giving you a 4 out of a scale of 10, it's a problem. Peter Schweitzer, always fact-based. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Dan Bongino is often on the show. He's a former Secret Service agent, an NRA TV spokesman, and the author of Spygate, the attempted sabotage of Donald J. Trump. You probably saw, Dan, as we did at the outset of the show, that there are these new documents pertaining to Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort, and in those is the word Russia. Now, that word is not explained, but it's repeated quite a bit. Is that evidence of a felony? When you use the word Russia over and over and over, that means the person about whom you're using it should be in jail. Is that the law? I'm just checking.
Well, maybe a grammatical felony if you spell it wrong, but the mentioning of Russia in a report is not a felony at all. You know, I mean, I love when you say that because it's true. They say it as if the mention of Russia somehow, it automatically imparts on someone an air of criminality. It's not true, Tucker. I've been to Russia. I've never been interviewed by the FBI. I went there as a Secret Service agent. Yes, shockingly,
I went
there
to Russia in your capacity as a federal agent?
It gets better.
Oh, my gosh.
Wait, Tucker, it gets better. This is where it really gets nasty. The government asked me to go over there as a Secret Service agent. How is that? How could the federal government ask me to commit such a crime as going to Russia? I mean, this is utterly absurd.
Well,
it's
ridiculous.
But
a conspiracy so vast, right? Of course.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
That's the hallmark of a conspiracy theory. It can never be disproven, right? So,
exactly.
Listen, there's some takeaways here, though. I think we can figure out right now and affirmatively say, looking at these paperwork, that Bob Mueller is not investigating collusion. Bob Mueller is investigating Donald Trump. This is the equivalent of a taxpayer-funded private investigator following Donald Trump and his team around to harass him for the rest of his presidency. This is a joke. It's an embarrassment. It's the stuff that's done in third world republics, and the media figures supporting this should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. This case is a farce.
Well, it's setting precedents I don't think any of us are going to want to live with for the rest of our lives. Seriously dangerous precedents about how the government behaves that I think really are a threat to democracy. Dan Bongino, great to see you always, despite your grave admission that you were once in Russia. See you next week. Well, today's Friday. We hope all of you enjoy the weekend. But this is sad news. We've got a report tonight. You need to be careful. Keep your doors locked, your kids inside. America's streets and voting booths are no longer safe because after fewer than 2 weeks in jail, Vladimir Putin's hand-picked Russian spy / democracy hacker, George Papadopoulos, is once again free, released, walking among us. Slide the dresser in front of the door and say a prayer. No one's safe while he's out. Straight ahead, Nancy Pelosi says Democrats will never, under any circumstances, allow our border to be protected because that would be immoral. We're quoting her, immoral. What should Republicans learn from this? That's after the break. In case you're wondering if the new Democratic Congress will fund a wall along our southern border, we have an answer. The incoming Speaker of the House has cleared it up. No chance, says Nancy Pelosi. Walls don't work, she explains. And more than that, they're wrong, morally wrong. Watch.
Most of us, speaking for myself, consider the wall immoral, ineffective. He also promised Mexico would pay for it. So even if they did, it's immoral still.
Now, if you're familiar with how things work in Washington, you may be wondering, when did morality begin to play such a central role in the legislative process? And the answer is the day that Nancy Pelosi got ordained. Pelosi is now an archbishop in the Church of Progressive Sanctimony. Her spiritual gift, hectoring. Listen to her preach.
What the president did was unconstitutional and indeed, in my view, immoral. It is a moral issue. This is a moral challenge. Immoral, unconstitutional, incompetent, short-sighted, and immoral. Our moral responsibility. We have a moral responsibility to the next generation. It's just a reflection of the weak moral authority.
Weak moral authority. That is not a problem for St. Nancy. Her moral authority is absolute. She is a good person. You, unfortunately, are not. So pay attention as she explains once again, a border wall is immoral. Well, fine. Far be it for us to question the command of an archbishop. We'll take her at her word. God hates walls. But wait, if walls are immoral, what about fences? Obama seemed to like them.
The bill before us will certainly do some good. It will authorize some badly needed funding for better fences and better security along our borders, and that should help stem some of the tide of illegal immigration in this country.
Better fences, says Obama. That sounds immoral. And what about Israel's security wall? It's big and real and very effective. Pelosi supported it, actually. She voted for a resolution defending that wall from UN condemnation. It's confusing. It must have been before her conversion. But now that walls are definitely immoral, a few obvious theological questions arise. What about doors and locks? How about hedges or security systems or airport checkpoints or anything else that's specifically designed to keep some people out? What about the gate in front of Pelosi's weekend house? Is St. Nancy against all of that? Of course not. Republicans often say the left opposes borders. We've said that many times, but it's not quite true. In their own lives, Democrats are all for exclusivity. They're not in a hurry to resettle refugees on Martha's Vineyard, for example. They just oppose America's borders. America is a sinful nation, they tell us. We can only atone for those sins by giving what we have to the entire world. So there's a lesson here for Republicans. The president got elected by promising a border wall. People wanted that. They voted for him. The president pledged that in almost every speech he gave.
I'm going to build a wall, and it's going to be a real wall, a big wall, a strong wall. Nobody's coming through unless it's legal. Nobody. It's going to be a real wall, not a toy wall like we have right now.
Don't worry, folks. We're going to be building the wall.
Well, Paul Ryan never wanted a wall. Pelosi has made it crystal clear that Democrats will never build one. They'd rather have the country fall apart first. In fact, they've already made that decision. America's middle class is dying. The border goes unsecured. The next 3 weeks are the final chance Republicans will have in a long time to keep their promise on the wall. It wouldn't be easy to do it, but it wouldn't be impossible. There's precedent for it. Democrats lost the House in 2010, and in the short window before the Republicans took back the House, in the lame duck period, Barack Obama got quite a few of his priorities into law. Democrats repealed the military's ban on gay service members, affirmed a nuclear treaty with Russia. They even passed Michelle Obama's school lunch bill. So Republicans could fund a wall before turning back the House. They could have done it at any point in the past 2 years. They just don't really want to. Keep that in mind. Enrique Acevedo is an anchor at Univision. He joins us today. Enrique, thanks very much for coming on. Now, you're a journalist. I'm not a theologian either, but Nancy Pelosi has just informed us that a border wall is immoral. Do you think that all walls are immoral, just our border wall? What about the wall in Israel? Is that immoral?
You can cherry pick the word immoral, but she also called it expensive and ineffective, which couldn't be more true. To tell you the truth, this is what's immoral, to tell your audience and the American people that a border wall is going to solve our immigration crisis, to use the wall as some sort of extortion to pass the DREAM Act and legalize the lives of hundreds of thousands of young kids who are as American as any other. I tell you also what's immoral, to use the wall as a way to get elected. So I think that's what she was referring to.
Wait, but hold on. Can't we just disagree? Does one of us have to be immoral now? Maybe we just disagree about the wall. Why does one of us have to be a sinner and the other virtuous?
No, I think being, the immorality of the wall is the signal it sends to a country that has been a partner, an ally, a good neighbor like Mexico. It says we're for division, we're for hate. It says that we don't want others to come to this country while this country was founded by immigrants. So I think that's what's immoral about it. It really betrays fundamental principles, foundational principles in this country.
So where's Univision headquarters? Down in Florida or New York? I haven't been.
We're down here in Florida.
Okay, so if I were to go tomorrow, and I got the day off, and I showed up at your building uninvited, would I find a wall or a checkpoint? Would I have to show ID, or could I just go in and use your office and take some of your office supplies?
You would also find a wall around my home, and I'm sure you have one also, Tucker.
I don't,
but those walls are not for your neighbors, your business partners, the person in charge of helping you out on Saturday night with the kids, for the nanny. They're for dangerous criminals and maybe even terrorists. Those walls are not to keep us from our friends,
that's not
from
true.
the people we love and the people who want to help us.
Hold on, no. The wall signifies ownership. So you guys own Univision, you own your home. You get to decide who comes over. If you have a dinner party with your friends, that's great. If 12 strangers come in and eat your food, it's not a dinner party, it's an invasion. So the key factor is your choice. You get to decide who comes into your home because it's your home. Same with your office at Univision. Same with our country, which is America, where I was born. So we don't have a right to say who comes in or out? That's immoral? How?
No, I think the U.S. has every right to secure its borders, and I think it's done that for the past half a century. We've spent, just in the last 12 years, over $100 billion on border security. This has become a dangerously misleading narrative, this idea of border security, because we say the border is not secure, while the border is as secure as it's ever been in our history.
Okay, so, I guess the obvious question is, how do we get 22 million illegal aliens living in our country if the border's so secure? But if you're for border security, why are you against a wall? It's another form of border security. Why is that so offensive? Why is that so immoral? Why are people who support it sinners? Maybe because it's effective? Is that the problem?
I didn't say they're sinners. By the way, you know who also thinks the wall is immoral? The Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church.
Really, is there a wall
Nancy
around
Pelosi
the
is not alone on this.
Vatican? Oh, okay, so the Pope. There's a wall around the Vatican. I think if I try to get in the Vatican without the Pope's invitation, I get arrested.
I've never had any issues walking into St. Peter's Square. There's actually just a white line, and everybody can go across.
I've been there. There's actually a wall.
So there's a misconception about the Vatican being a walled city. Anyone can walk into St. Peter's Square without any sort of issue.
St. Peter's Square, but you can't walk
that's
into the Vatican.
That's like the heart of the Vatican.
No, actually, you can't walk freely through the Vatican. I've been there, and you know. Let's be totally real. The truth is that people, when they own something, when they're invested in it, have a right to determine, and you already conceded this, who comes in or out. And walls are but one way to affirm that right. But you say it's immoral. I don't understand. I honestly, and I mean this with sincerity, and I respect you, so I don't want your real answer.
I know you mean.
What is the difference? A fence is not immoral, but a wall is immoral? Unpack that
like I said, I think it's immoral because what it represents, the signal that it's trying to send, division, hate. It's trying to somehow paint the U.S. as an isolationist country, as a country who doesn't want people to come here. And that's not, I think, who we are and how this country was founded. Those are not the principles and the values of the American people.
Voters will determine that. But let me just ask, but why does a fence not send that same message?
I'm sorry?
A fence does not send the message of hate. But a wall does send a message of hate?
I think a wall, it's a message of division. It's a wall of keeping others away.
Why is a fence not the same message? I don't understand. How is a fence different from a wall?
I think that's just semantics. The fence, a wall, it's pretty much the same thing. And I would argue that Democrats and Republicans are both responsible for this idea of this dangerously misleading narrative of border security. Many Democrats voted in favor of the 700-mile wall that's already at the border. So I don't think this is a Republican or Democrat issue. I think that the American people have been lied to in this sense, and that's what's immoral about this.
Then tell them the truth, very quick. Obama called for a fence. We have a fence along, say, the San Ysidro-Tijuana border. You're okay with that because you're for border security. But if the fence became a wall, it would become immoral. Tell me the substantive difference between a fence and a wall. Is it an aesthetic difference? I mean, honestly,
I think it's just semantics, Tucker. Like I said, Democrats voted for the 700-mile wall, fence, whatever you want to call it. And that's not really helping solve our immigration crisis. We've seen that, and I think it's going to help the Border Patrol do their job better.
Do you think
I think we can find solutions that can do that are less expensive than $25 billion.
Okay. And really quick, is the Israeli wall immoral too? Does that send a message of hate?
I'm sorry?
Is the Israeli wall along the West Bank line, is that immoral too? Does that send a message of hate?
I think that's a different circumstance, right? Because they were being threatened by the very real possibility of terrorists coming to their country, and you can prove that by building that wall. They've been able to reduce that threat considerably. So it's a different circumstance.
It's a good thing. Okay, there, but not here. All right, Enrique, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tucker.
Antifa is...
Big night of continuing breaking news this evening. In rolls the first stages, finally, of this year-and-a-half-long investigation, which is supposed to be designed to figure out whether President Trump's campaign colluded or conspired with Russian operatives to throw the 2016 election. So we're going to break this down, whether or not any of it really appears to point definitively in that direction. In other words, what have we learned tonight about what Robert Mueller has found so far, and what does it actually tell us about the big picture? So Michael Cohen, the president's former self-declared fixer, we've learned a lot about him and his character this evening. They have recommended substantial prison time for him. Also accusing President Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who had a lot of ties to a lot of people before he joined that campaign. They've basically said that he is guilty of discernible lies in the violation of his plea agreement. The government is none too happy with Paul Manafort, and that's quite clear. Good evening, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum, and this is definitely the story tonight. President Trump says he feels confident in the early take that he sees in all of this, tweeting this: totally clears the president. Thank you! Exclamation point. Catherine Herridge has been going over all of it tonight as the news has been breaking and the information has been coming in. Catherine, good to have you with us this evening as you watched all of this pour in. Let's break it into the two parts, the two people. Starting with Michael Cohen, as you go through these documents, what is the most damning information against Michael Cohen, and what pieces of it potentially implicate President Trump in any way?
Right. That's a great question. So late today, for folks at home, just to kind of bring them up to date, we had two filings in the Michael Cohen case. One was from the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, and the other was from the special counsel. These were what they call sentencing memos. As you mentioned, substantial jail time, about 4 years, and a fine of $500,000. Buried in one of the filings from the special counsel is kind of an indication or a flavor of the kind of information that he provided to investigators about contacts between Russian officials and the Trump campaign. And that section of the filing reads, Cohen provided the SCO, that's the acronym for the Special Counsel Office, with useful information concerning certain discrete Russia-related matters core to its investigation that he obtained by virtue of his regular contact with company executives during the campaign. Cohen provided relevant and useful information concerning his contacts with persons connected to the White House during the 2017 and 2018 time period. What we don't know tonight, Martha, is who those Russian individuals were, what was the nature of the outreach, and did it actually connect in the end, and was there any follow-through? But we know Cohen has provided information related to these allegations of collusions with a foreign government, in this case, Russia, Martha.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. When you go through this filing from the Southern District of New York, which is 40-some pages, and then the government's version is about 8 pages, and any time served would be concurrent. That's the request of Robert Mueller's team and the special counsel. But there's a lot of stuff that was kicked up to, so to speak, the New York, Southern District of New York investigation, because it was not relevant to Mueller's investigation. So I guess what I'm asking is, how much of this 40 pages would have happened to Michael Cohen, tax evasion, all of this stuff, and how much of the 4 years without any of the lines that relate to anything that might have to do with the campaign?
Well, what jumped out at me in the filing is that there was a recognition that Michael Cohen had provided some useful information to the special counsel, but this was not enough to mitigate what the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York felt was a substantial pattern of deceit and fraud by Michael Cohen. Those charges with the U.S. Attorney relate to bank fraud, tax fraud, and campaign finance violations. As you rightly point out, that was kind of carved carved out of the special counsel investigation, but you can still see with the filings today, and they're worth reading, how the two groups, the U.S. Attorney and the special counsel, continue to work together in this matter, Martha.
Right. So then you've got basically two areas of connection as I see it here. You have Stormy Daniels and Karen, I believe is her first name, McDougal, the two people who there were financial agreements with to essentially keep quiet, and that arrangement was made shortly before the November elections. So that has raised a question of campaign finance violations and whether or not that money was directly paid for the purpose of helping the president's election. And the other one is the Moscow Project, which he was not truthful about in terms of saying when his outreach to them ended. He said it ended in January, but then he said, actually, I lied about that. It ended in June. So those are the two areas that seem to be the most potent here for future for more future revelations, correct?
Right. So you make a good point about the campaign finance violations, because the U.S. Attorney argues that what Cohen did was sort of so elaborate and so heavily embroidered, you know, a shell company and, you know, crazy names and not real names and using a media organization. So it was a very elaborate, very sort of deceitful. It was very deliberate, if you will, for lack of a better term. So this is one of the reasons that they're punishing him. On the Moscow real estate project, I think we need to not read too much into this filing. It's deliberately vague, right? For reasons that are obvious.